So you want to learn Excel, but find it too boring. Never say that out loud. Excel is not boring. The instructors you've had are. Give me the next 2 hours of your life, and I promise you're going to fall in love with what MS Excel can do. Starting right now, because in today's video, we are going to see basics of a workbook, flash fill and autofill, what is a ribbon, home tab features, split and freeze pane, what are functions and formulas, absolute and relative referencing, logical and text functions, lookup function, tables and charts, pivot tables, MS Excel errors and more. And that's a lot to cover. Feel free to use the timestamps below to skip to a section that you are eager to learn. Although I promise you will enjoy how this video has been structured as well. But first things first, I've created a practice Excel sheet for you that you can use to practice the features along with me, because that's the best way to learn, really, to get your hands dirty. You'll find the link to download it in the description. And as usual, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, because it tells me that I should keep making more videos. Let's begin. Now, what is Microsoft Excel? Excel is a spreadsheet application by Microsoft used to store, organize, analyze, and perform calculations on data. Its main purpose is to help us draw some conclusions, give us some insights into our data, so that we can make informed decisions in our professional and personal lives. How does Excel help with my personal life, Taskeen? Well, if you create a personal monthly budget sheet or are tracking the dates you're going to, movies, restaurants, trips, and noting down those expenses, then how is that not personal? And professionally, it is used by everybody, from educators to financial analysts, product managers to programmers, digital marketers to construction managers. No doubts, it's one of the hot skills even for remote job opportunities. So without further delay, let's learn this powerful tool today. If you do not have MS Excel installed on your desktop, then you can watch the first video of this course to know how to access MS Excel on the web for free. The link to this video is in the description. MS Excel is installed on my laptop already, and I'm going to use that throughout this course. Let's get started. In this section, we'll look at the various components of a workbook. When you open the MS Excel application, you will see an option to open a new blank workbook, just like this. Click on it and you will see your screen filled with these boxes. A workbook is made up of multiple worksheets. This is one worksheet. Click on this plus icon and a new sheet gets created, and another one. By clicking on these tabs, you can navigate from one sheet to the other. And if you double click on one of them, you can rename it. Let's say you want to name your worksheets Jan, Feb, March, if you're tracking expenses of every month. Now let's look inside a worksheet. Each sheet has these horizontal rows which are numbered 1, 2, 3 and so on, and vertical columns which are lettered A, B, C and so on. The intersection of a row and a column is called a cell. A cell is where you enter your data, be it numbers, text, formulas or functions. We will understand what formulas and functions are in just a few minutes. For now, let's pay attention to how a cell is referred to. Each cell is named using its column letter and row number. For example, this cell is named C7 because it's at the intersection of column C and row 7. Similarly, this cell is named B12 and this one is J7. They're also called cell addresses. You can even see the cell address reflected over here in this name box. But why do we need cell addresses? Let's assume you want to calculate the sum of numbers present in these 5 cells. The most common way is to use the sum function. Don't worry, we'll cover functions in detail in a few minutes. For now, just understand that the sum function needs to be told that these are the numbers to be added by providing their cell addresses. Let's see how. You first need to type an equal sign followed by the function name, which is sum. And inside these parentheses, you need to provide the cell addresses of all of these 5 cells. We can do that in 3 ways. First, I can type out each of the cell addresses, A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, each separated by a comma. And then the sum would be calculated. But it's too cumbersome, isn't it? What if we want to add 100 values? Can't type in all of those 100 addresses. Which is why we have a second option, using a cell range. Inside the parentheses of the sum function, if I simply type B1 colon B5, it refers to all of the 5 cells from B1 to B5. Third option is to just use your cursor. Open your sum function parenthesis, then go to the first cell and drag it down to select all the values. Notice how inside the sum function, the cell range gets automatically updated, which in this case is C1 colon C10. And there you go. That is how cell ranges work. Now let's add some data to our Excel. This is a data set of 6 novels. Each row corresponds to a new book and each column has a detail about that book, like author name, ratings, and its price. Let's use this data to understand how to perform insert, delete, and hide. Suppose you want to insert a new empty row above row number 5, that is above this Harry Potter row. For that, select this 5th row using your cursor, right click and then select insert from these options, and a new row will be inserted right above it. And to delete a row, select the row you want to delete, right click and delete, and the row you had selected will be deleted. You can use the same method to insert or delete columns. Suppose you want to insert a new column to the left of column C. For that, select column C, right click and click on insert. Similarly, to delete a column, select the column that you want to delete, right click and delete, and that column will disappear. If you've deleted something by mistake, you can undo using Ctrl Z, which is the universal undo shortcut. Now what is this hide option? Let's say you don't want to delete a column but also don't want to see it right now. Using the hide option allows you to hide that column or row temporarily out of view. Select the column you want to hide. Let's say it's column B. Right click on it and select hide. This bold line you see between A and C indicates that there is a column between them which is currently hidden. To make B visible again, you need to select both A and C because column B is hiding between them. Then right click and unhide, and B will be visible again. You can hide and unhide rows in a similar fashion. Select the row or rows you want to hide. Let's say it's rows 4 and 5. Right click and select hide. Notice the bold line between 3 and 6. Now to unhide, select both 3 and 6 because 4 and 5 are hiding between them. Right click and unhide. And there you go, 4 and 5 will be visible again. Now let's move on to the most important component of a workbook, the MS Excel ribbon. The ribbon runs at the top of the application and it provides quick access to some of the most commonly used MS Excel tools and features. The ribbon has multiple tabs where each tab groups a similar set of features. There are about 9 tabs here. Let's look at a few. On the Home tab, you will find some basic formatting tools, the sort and filter feature, find and select feature. We will learn more about them in the section that is coming up next. The Insert tab has options to insert pivot tables, charts, and other objects. We are going to learn about these objects as well in this video. Review tab gives you options to add notes, comments, even to protect your sheet. Formulas tab houses the most used mathematical functions, logical functions, text functions, and more. This is my most favorite tab and we're going to have so much fun learning about functions and formulas later in this video. So in this section, we have learned various components of a workbook and a worksheet, how to insert, delete, and hide a row or a column. And we took a quick sneak peek into the features of the famous MS Excel ribbon. Don't forget to use the first few tabs from our practice workbook to play around with these features that we have discussed in this section. The link to download the workbook is in the description. Autofill and flash fill make you more efficient by reducing your repetitive manual work. Let's see how. When you move around your spreadsheet, you would notice a thick white plus sign hovering around, just like this. But if you hover your cursor at the bottom right corner of an active cell, it turns into a thinner black cross. This is called the fill handle. It copies data from your active cell, which in our case is cell A2, to wherever you're dragging it. So 1 gets copied all the way to A11. Notice the small box that pops up on the bottom right corner. When you click on it, you notice that the option copy cells is selected, which is what autofill did. It just copied the values from the active cell to the rest of the cells. But we can even change it to fill series, where instead of just copying, Excel automatically increments this value. And there you go, you don't have to manually enter numbers anymore. But why stop at incrementing by just 1? I want to increase it by 50. For that, I need not 1 but 2 values. So I'll enter 50 and 100 here. Instead of selecting just one cell, I must select both so that Excel understands the pattern. Then I'll take the fill handle and drag it down. And as you can see, the cells keep incrementing by 50. So if you want to increment by more than just 1, then enter the first 2 values of that pattern. Autofill works for dates as well. Select your date cell, use the fill handle, drag it down, and autofill is incrementing the date by 1. You can just choose to copy the values as well using this autofill options button. You'll notice that here a few extra options also appear for date, like fill days, fill weekdays, months or years. If you select weekdays, then weekends would be eliminated. The month keeps getting incremented if you select fill months, and year gets incremented if you select fill years. You can use autofill even for time, just like this. You can use autofill for days of the week. Just like you had for dates, extra options appear for days of the week too. I would encourage you to play around with these extra options and see how they work. In fact, try to increment your dates and time, not just by 1 but by 2 or 3, and see how it works. And here's something better. The fill handle works not only if you drag it down, but also if you drag it up. You can drag it to the right and even to the left. Let's see how. I'm going to enter 1 in this cell. If I use the fill handle and drag it down and select fill series, it increments the value. But if I take the fill handle and drag it up and select fill series, it reduces the value. So dragging the fill handle down increments the value, but dragging it up reduces it. What about right and left? Dragging the fill handle to the right and selecting fill series increments the value, but dragging the fill handle to the left and selecting fill series reduces the value. But remember, the fill handle does not move diagonally. I would encourage you to use days of the week as well and see how autofill behaves up, down, right and left. In fact, see how it behaves with years as well. Start with the year 2020, drag the fill handle up and see how MS Excel can reverse time. Clearly, autofill is a very useful tool, but it works even better when you're using autofill for formulas. I'll show you how when we get to the formulas and functions section in this video. Coming to flash fill. Think of it as a smarter autofill because it automatically extracts, combines or separates data when it sees a pattern in the adjacent cell. To understand it better, let's look at this data set. Column A has first names, column B has last names. Suppose in column C you want to combine both first and last names to get the full name. If you try to type it manually or even do a copy paste, it's going to take forever. But thank God for flash fill because all you need to do is type the full name only for the first row. After that, select the second row, go to your data tab and click on this tiny button that says flash fill. And there you go. Flash fill does your work for you in no time at all. Another way to access flash fill is to hover at the bottom right corner of the active cell until you see the fill handle. Now you can drag it all the way down or simply do a double click here. By default, fill handle copies the active cell. Click on this options button right here and select flash fill and voila, flash fill does its thing. This was a combining cells example. Flash fill can be a lifesaver even in cases where you have to extract data from a cell. This data set has some email IDs. Let's say you want to remove @Gmail from all of them. Type out the first row. Click on the second row. Now go to the data tab, select flash fill and there you go. @Gmail has now disappeared for all of these rows. Another scenario where you can use flash fill is when you want to separate data. Let's say I want to separate full names into 2 columns, first name and last name. As usual, I'll type out the first row for both of these columns. Click on the next cell under first names and press Ctrl E, which is a shortcut for flash fill. And the first name gets populated for the rest of the rows. I'll go to the next cell under last names and press Ctrl E again. And there you go. You now have first name and last name columns duly filled. And that's how you can use flash fill to combine data, extract data and separate data. In this section, we've learned how to use flash fill for numbers, days of the week, time, how autofill behaves when you drag your fill handle down, up, to the right and left, and how flash fill is used to combine, extract and separate data. I would encourage you to use this data on the flash fill sheet that's present in your practice workbook to try out all of these options. Have fun. In this section, let's deep dive into the features available on the Home tab of the MS Excel ribbon. On your ribbon, select the Home tab. You'll notice that the very first set of icons are cut, copy and paste. I'm sure you know how to use these already. Using these options right here, I can modify the font of my text like this, change its size, I can change the color of the text and even add a background fill color that fills up the entire cell, just like this. You can use these options to add a border around your cell, especially if you want to highlight that cell. You would notice that most of these are similar to the tools you use in your other Microsoft Office products like Word or PPT. You can use these set of icons to change the alignment of your text. This one aligns your data to the top of your cell, middle, and this one at the bottom of the cell. These are your left, center, and right alignment options. This one changes the orientation of your cell by giving it a certain angle. This is especially useful if you're trying to make your column headers stand out, or if you don't want them to take more space horizontally. This icon is called the Format Painter, that allows you to copy the format of your active cell and apply it to another cell, just like this. If you want to lock that format in place and apply it to multiple cells, then double click on the paintbrush, and now you can apply it to as many cells as you want until you press escape. Next, we have the text wrap feature. It helps you solve the problems of text being so long that it overlaps with the adjacent cell problem, or in this case, text being so long that it gets hidden problem. To make them readable, select that entire column or only those cells and click on wrap text, and it displays the cell contents in multiple lines, and that makes your text more readable. But in some cases, you want your text string to occupy multiple columns. Let's assume you want to give a heading to this data. Insert a new row. Let's call the heading must read fiction. But I want this heading to be at the center of all of these columns. For that, I'll select the row spanning all of these columns and click on merge and center. It merges the selected cells into one cell and aligns the text at the center. I can even format it further, make it bold, add a little fill color to make it stand out. Looks so much better. Let's move on to number formats. Click on the drop down and you notice how Excel allows you to specify the data type for a cell value. Like if it's a random number, currency, date, time, percentage, or just text. Since these columns are prices, let's select them and select accounting from the drop down. You can even select currency. Both of them just have some minor changes in the way they display value. You can modify the decimal places from here, increase or decrease. And you can even change the currency from INR to euros, dollars, or to any other currency present here. I would encourage you to try out the other formats like date, percentage, and time when you're using the practice workbook. Moving on to conditional formatting. Let's look at this modified data set of funding information on startups. Roughly, it has the startup name, investor name, and the amount invested. Let's say I want to quickly see the top 5 investment amounts. For that, I'll select this column amount, go to conditional formatting, top bottom rules, top 10 items. But instead of 10, I'll enter 5 here. Change color to green. Click on OK. And there you go. The top 5 investment amounts get highlighted. Similarly, you can choose to highlight the bottom X investment amounts. Above average, below average. You can even use conditional formatting to find out if you have any duplicate values in your data. Now let's say you want to find out which startups got more funding than say Car Dekho X. For that, I'll select the amount column again, go to highlight cell rules, greater than, and select the amount from Car Dekho X. Select a different color, maybe yellow. Click on OK. And there you go. Investment amounts greater than Car Dekho X's funding will get highlighted. Now here's the problem. It looks like both are highlighting rules and their colors are fighting for attention. To solve this, select the column where rules have been applied. Click on conditional formatting and then manage rules. This is where you can view all the rules that have been applied on this selection. You can either choose to delete a rule from here or simply choose the clear rules option present over here. Next, we have these 3 options: data bars, color scales, and icon sets, which give a visual appeal to your data. With data bars, you can immediately see which number is the largest because it will have most of its cell area filled in color, while the smallest numbers will have the smallest bars. I would encourage you to use this data set and play around with color scales and icon sets in your practice workbook. Conditional formatting is particularly useful if you have sales data and you want to quickly see who has met sales targets, whose results have been below average, top 5 sales figures, so on and so forth. In this formatting box, one other feature that I find myself using almost every time is this auto-fit column width feature. Let's assume your data looks like this. In fact, almost every time you do a copy and paste, your data would look like this. A few column headers will be hidden. Clearly, every column needs a different size. To solve all of this in one go, do a Control A to select the entire worksheet. Go to Format in your Home tab and select Autofill Column Width. And all of the columns would be neatly resized. Okay, time to sit up straight and pay attention because it's one of the most important features present in the Home tab, the Find and Select. Let's look at the sample data set of student information, which includes student names, colleges and cities. I want you to pay attention to this city column, particularly Hyderabad. Let's say this data came from a form filled by students, and some students had entered HYD for Hyderabad, some wrote capital HYD, comma, India, and some did use the entire city name. Let's say I want to clean this data and replace all such occurrences with just HYDERABAD, Hyderabad. To do that, let's first find out where all HYD has been used in this sheet. Click on Find and Select and enter HYD asterisk in this box right here. The asterisk is a wildcard that denotes any number of characters. So HYD asterisk means words which have HYD followed by any number of characters, which means it will cover all of these 3 unique occurrences as well. Let's click on Find All to be sure. As you can see, all the occurrences of HYD will be visible. These options here will help you customize your search even further if you want to match the case, match the entire word, search the sheet or entire workbook. In your search result box, pay attention to the cell and value column. As I said earlier, to clean my data, I want to replace all such occurrences of HYD to Hyderabad. Now, select on this tab that says Replace. There are 2 ways to go about it. Select each row and hit Replace one by one until all the values get replaced. Or if you're confident that only the values you want to change have appeared in the search result, then you can go ahead and click on Replace All and all the values will change all at once. And there you go, neat and clean data. I know wildcards take a little time to get comfortable with, so use the practice Excel worksheet you've downloaded to practice using the wildcard asterisk. In fact, I've also mentioned 2 other wildcards in the MS Excel interview video, which is the 3rd video of this course. So make sure you check that out. Next is the sort and filter feature. Let's start with sort. Look at this data set of student names and their scores. Let's assume I want to sort them based on their marks from highest to lowest. For that, I'll select the scores column and click on Sort Largest to Smallest. This is an interesting box because we did not select all the columns. Excel is asking us specifically if we want to expand the selection, which means sort the rest of the columns along with the selected column. If we select Continue with current selection, then only the scores column will get sorted. As you just witnessed, student name column did not change at all, which means students have been allocated incorrect scores. So I'm going to go back and select this option, expand the selection. Click OK. And that's how scores along with their corresponding student names have been sorted, largest to smallest. Let's say I want to sort by scores, but in case some students have same scores, then I want them sorted according to their names. I want Severus first and Tom next. To achieve this, I'll use Custom Sort. I'm selecting both columns. Go to Sort and Filter, Custom Sort. Our first sort is already listed here, which is based on largest to smallest scores. Now I will add another sort by clicking on this plus button. As you can see, a new row gets added that says Then By. Under column, I'm going to select student name A to Z, and there you go. Albus and Hermione have the same scores, but Albus is first and then Hermione, and Severus is first and then Tom. The last feature of the Home tab that we're going to discuss in this section is the filter feature. Let's look at this dummy data set of startup funding information. From this, let's say I only want to see the startups who have been funded from the city of Bangalore. For that, I'll go to Sort and Filter and select Filter. A downward arrow appears next to each header, which specifies that now there are filters applied to all of these columns. Let's click on the city filter. Unselect all and only select the city Bangalore. And without any modification to my data, without the need to delete anything, I can now only see the rows which have Bangalore as their city. To see all of the rows again, just click on your filter and do a select all. Next, let's say I want to see investments that have been made in e-commerce. So I click on the industry vertical filter and select e-commerce, and the corresponding startups will be displayed. If you would notice, these bold lines on the left signify that some rows have been hidden, which is what a filter does. It hides rows you don't want to see and unhides them when you clear a filter, just like this. The filter box also has a bunch of other options. You can sort these rows in ascending or descending order. Use contains. Let's say I enter the letter I here, and all the cities which have the character I in them will be displayed, which is New Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Noida, Faridabad and SF4. And that's what a filter does. It lets you look at your data through various angles. So in this section, we have learned various home tab features like formatting tools, text wrap, merge and center, number formats, conditional formatting, auto fit column with feature, find, select and replace feature, and finally the sort and filter feature. Needless to say, pause the video, go to your practice workbook and use the sample data to practice all of the features that we've discussed in this section. Please do it, because that is how you'll remember them. Before we move on to function and formulas, two view tab features that we must discuss today are split and free space. Let's look at this data set with way too many rows and columns. Let's assume I want to compare the values of row number 5 with row number 50. But by the time I scroll down to row number 50, row number 5 disappears and I have nothing to compare. To solve this, I can use the split feature. Because I want to compare row 5, I'm going to select a row below it, which is row number 6. Go to View tab and click on Split. As you can see, the worksheet is now divided into two panes that can be scrolled independently of each other. While the first pane displays row number 5, I can scroll down in the second pane to view row number 50. And that's how the split option lets me compare rows that otherwise wouldn't have been visible on the same screen together. After I'm done with the comparison, I can unsplit my worksheet by clicking the split button again. Similarly, to split a worksheet vertically, select a column and click on split. And you will notice two vertical panes having their own scroll bars. You can even split a worksheet into 4 panes. Select one cell near which you want the split to happen and click on split. Now you will have these 4 quadrants that can be scrolled through independently. But remember, any changes made to any one pane gets reflected in the other panes as well, just like this. And after you unsplit your worksheet, it would be reflected in your original data set as well. So be very careful of the changes that you make. Let's see what are free space. Since we have so many rows in this data set, by the time I reach the 30th row, I have no idea what data this column holds, aka what is the column name, what is the header. To solve this, I'll go to the View tab and click on Freeze Top Row. This freezes the top header row in place so that even when I scroll down, I can see what the header of each column says. After you are done, click on Unfreeze Panes. The same problem exists with columns. By the time I scroll to the right, I don't even know the name of the startup that has received this amount of funding. So to solve it, I click on this Freeze First Column option right here. Now when I scroll to the right, the first column remains frozen in place and I can see what is the name of the startup right next to the investment amount it has received. Now let's assume you want to freeze the top 5 rows in place. For that, select one row below it, which is the 6th row, and click on Freeze Panes. And the top 5 rows will be frozen in place while you scroll down to the rest of the rows. This is particularly useful if you want to compare, say, the top 5 values of something with the rows below. Let's click on Unfreeze Panes again. You can even do the same with columns. The difference between split and freeze pane is that the split feature allows you to have multiple panes of the same worksheet that can be scrolled independently of each other. But the freeze feature locks some rows or columns in place and allows you to scroll through the remaining rows and columns. And any changes you make to either of the views gets reflected in the original data set. But hey, don't believe me. Use the practice workbook to make those changes after splitting or freezing your screen and check it out yourself. So in this section, we have learned how to use the split option under View tab and how to use the Freeze Panes option under the View tab. Finally, we've reached the section we've been desperately waiting for, functions and formulas. Let's understand what they are through some examples. Let's say I want to find the sum of these 5 numbers. To do that, I'll use the sum function. I first need to type in an equal sign followed by the function name. The equal sign is important because it tells Excel that what you're going to type next is the name of a function and not any random text. The function name we want to use is sum. Next, open parenthesis and Excel will automatically display the syntax of this function. As you can see, it says number 1, number 2 and so on. You can either directly give the numbers or give the cell addresses of where your numbers are stored. My numbers are stored right here. So I'll use my cursor to select them and the cell range gets updated inside the function. If you need to refresh your memory about what cell range and cell addresses are, please go back to this minute of our video where we have discussed it in detail. Next, close your parenthesis and there you go. It returns the sum of all of these values in no time. And that's what functions do. Functions are predefined formulas by MS Excel to help you perform quick mathematical calculations. This cell displays the value, but if you notice the formula bar at the top, you can see the function you've used to reach this result and the parameters you've passed to it. Let's look at another example. I want to calculate the average of these two numbers. To do that, I will type an equal sign followed by the function name, which is average. Inside the parentheses, I will give addresses of these two cells and there you go. Average neatly calculated. Now I want to find the max of these values. I'll type equal to followed by max and give these 4 cell addresses as parameters within the max function. And there you go. The maximum of these values get displayed. Know that functions are dynamic. So if I change a value within these cells to say 5000, then the maximum value gets updated here for your formula cell too. Pretty cool, huh? Similarly, let's use the min function of these values and there you go. The last set of functions we are going to see in this section are count, count A and count blank. Count returns the number of cells within a cell range that have numbers. Let's say I use the count function for these 5 cells, but it will only return count as 4 because only 4 out of these 5 cells have numbers. The last cell right here has an alphabet, so it leaves it out. The function count A on the other hand returns the number of cells that are not blank. So it returns 5 because it counts the last cell as well, even though it has an alphabet. And count blank counts the number of blank cells within a selection, which is 3 in this case. We also have the count if function, but don't worry, I'll tell you about it in the logical function section after we cover the if function first, because only then count if will make sense. But before we end this section, we must understand the difference between a formula and a function. Look at these 3 numbers. Let's say I want to find the sum of these 2 numbers and then multiply that result by this third number. This thing that I wrote over here is called a formula. A formula is defined by the user, you or me, depending on the mathematical operation we want to perform. A function, on the other hand, is a predefined formula by MS Excel, like the sum function or the count function, max function, min function. They help you perform a specified operation. So formulas are user defined by us and functions are predefined by Excel. Now open your practice workbook and play around with the functions listed under the formulas tab. Click on this insert function button and take a look at the functions that appear on the right hand side pane. You'll also find their description and syntax here at the bottom of the pane. So in this section we have learned what are functions. We learned how to use the sum, average, max, min, count, count A and count blank functions. What is the difference between a function and a formula, and how to use the insert function option. I know it was a lot, so take a break, grab a cup of coffee and I will see you in the next section. I hope you feel refreshed after that cup of coffee because you're going to need all that attention to understand this section. And it'll be worth it because relative and absolute referencing is one of the most important features of Excel. Let's take a look at this data set. It consists of 9 student names and the marks they've scored in their math and history exams. I want to get a total of both of these scores for each student. For that, I'll write a sum function for the first student, Harry. Inside the sum function, I will provide the cell addresses of his math and history scores, which is cell B2, C2. And there you go. So the sum function did the calculation for us. But I don't want to write the sum function for the rest of the 8 students. And I don't have to. I will just hover my cursor to the bottom right corner of this cell where I wrote the formula until I see a fill handle. And I'll just double click here. And the formula gets copied to the rest of the rows. All thanks to the autofill feature we've discussed earlier in this video. If you want to refresh your memory about what autofill is, you can go back to this minute. But come back right here after you're done because things just got interesting. Now let's look at the formula bar. You can see the values in the cells, but you can see the formula that has led to that value in the formula bar. Here, you would notice that the sum function gets copied, but the cell addresses are getting updated. The formula here calculates Hermione's marks. This formula calculates Ron's, Draco's, and so on. This is called relative referencing. It lets you write a formula just once and updates the cell references when you copy it elsewhere. The formula I had typed reference cells B2 and C2, but then it automatically updated itself to reference cells B3 and C3, and then B4 and C4, and so on. When a formula is copied down, relative referencing increments the row number. But notice how the column alphabet is remaining the same. It's still B and C for all of these. But when the formula is copied to the right, relative referencing increments the column alphabet, while the row number remains the same. So if I am to take this formula and drag it to the right, the column alphabet gets incremented. B2 becomes C2 and C2 becomes D2, but the row number remains the same, which is 2. I know it is a little confusing, but practice it yourself using this data set and you will understand how relative referencing works better. But wait, what if I don't want my cell addresses to get updated when I copy my formula somewhere else? That's when absolute referencing comes into play. Let's look at this scenario. Let's say I want to now add this correction value to the total marks, maybe because some question paper had an error. I now have to write a formula to calculate the new total, which is the sum of the old total plus this new correction value, which is stored in cell B12, and Harry's total gets updated. I'm going to double click here and copy the same formula to the rest of the rows. And here's the problem. Rest of the values are not getting updated because of relative referencing. Let me explain. The first cell refers to B12 where I had stored my correction value, but this formula references B13 and then next one references B14 and then B15. But these cells are empty, which is why nothing gets added to the old value. It's great that the first cell address is getting incremented, but I don't want the second cell address to get incremented, which is why I am going to use absolute references to make the cell address absolute so that it does not change. I will use a $sign before the column alphabet and the row number so that B remains B and 12 remains 12, no matter where I'm copying the formula to. I'm going to double click here and there you go. The correction value correctly gets applied to all of the students. Now look at the formula bar. All these formulas are referencing cell B12 thanks to those $signs that we have placed. The use of a $sign in front of both the row number and column alphabet to make the cell addresses absolute is called absolute referencing. Now we know what is relative referencing and we know what is absolute referencing. It's not over. We have mixed referencing also. Let's look at another scenario. Let's assume I want to add a correction value of 5 to all the math scores and a correction value of 10 to all the history scores. I want the new math and history scores to be displayed here. And I only want to write one formula that will work everywhere. I will write that formula here, which is a sum function that adds all math score with this math correction value stored here in B33. When we copy this formula down, I don't want B33 to change. For that, I will add a $sign in front of both the alphabet B and the row number 33, like we did in absolute referencing. Now let's see what happens. Double click here. As you can see, all the old math scores are incremented by 5. Now let's try to copy this formula to the history column by dragging it to the right. What happened? The old history score just got incremented by 5. But I want it to be incremented by 10, which is the history correction value stored at cell C33. To really understand what happened, let's compare these two formulas. As you know, when you copy a formula to the right, relative referencing updates the column and not the row. So our first address of the formula, which is B23, is becoming C23. It's picking up the old history score, which is exactly what we want. But this second cell address doesn't change at all. It remains B33, where the math correction value is stored. But I want the cell address to change to C33, where the history correction value is stored. So the only change I need to make this one formula work everywhere is to remove this dollar sign that's present in front of B, so that B has the flexibility to change to C when it is dragged to the right. And there you go, B33 is now C33, and the old history score gets incremented by 10. But will this formula work if I drag it down? Yes, because when you copy a formula down, only row numbers are supposed to get incremented. The column alphabet does not change anyway, so it doesn't matter if there's a lock in front of B or not. And there you go, B remains B, and thanks to that dollar sign in front of row number 33, it does not get incremented as well. Now let's copy this formula down, and the rest of the history values get updated too, because all of these cells are referencing the value in C33. So this one formula we wrote here works everywhere thanks to mixed referencing. This scenario where you lock only the row and not the column, or lock only the column and not the row, it's called mixed referencing. Don't look at me like that. This is supposed to be confusing at first. You will get it, don't worry. You first need to be thorough with what relative referencing is. Only then absolute and mixed will make sense. So watch this section again, but this time practice using the practice workbook you have downloaded using the link in the description. Because unless you practice with me, I hate to break it to you, you will not remember it. But I promise once you play around with that practice workbook, you will understand referencing through and through. If you have any questions related to referencing, don't be shy to comment below and let me know. So in this section, we have covered what is relative referencing, absolute referencing, and our very favorite, mixed referencing. Have fun practicing. Are you over that referencing hangover yet? If you're not, don't worry. I've got a fun section planned for you. Logical functions. Let's start with the if function. If is a very popular Excel function that allows you to make a comparison and specify two results. The first result is returned if the comparison is true, and the second result is returned if the comparison is false. Let's look at this data set to understand it better. These are student marks out of a total of 120. I want to display pass if their marks are greater than 45, else I want to display fail. This is what my if function will look like. If B2 is greater than 45, which is the comparison I want to perform, and if that's true, I want to display pass here, else fail. I'm going to double click here and copy this formula for the rest of the cells. Thanks to relative referencing, the copied formula keeps incrementing its cell reference. In case you don't know what relative referencing is, I would encourage you to go back to this minute and watch relative referencing in detail. But come back right here after you're done. Let's look at another example. Instead of just returning text as a result, I want to print the percentage of students who have passed and just display fail for the ones who have failed. For that, my formula will look like this. Instead of pass, I am going to return the result of this mathematical operation, which is dividing their scores by 120 and multiplying by 100. And for the third parameter, I'll enter fail. And there you go. I am going to format the results here to ensure that there's just one decimal value displayed. We had discussed this formatting feature already at this minute, in case you want to go back and refresh your memory. The point I'm trying to make through this example is that the if function doesn't just return text, but can also return the result of a mathematical operation. What are nested ifs? Let's say instead of just 2 grades, pass and fail, I want to display 3 grades. Pass if it is below 45, just pass if it is 45, and fail if it is below 45. For that, I'll use nested ifs. I'll cover the first condition, that is if the score is greater than 45, then display pass. But if it is not, now I have to cover 2 scenarios, equal to 45 and less than 45. So in the second result, I'll add another if condition that compares the scores with 45. If it's equal to 45, then I want the result to say just pass. And if it's not, which means it is less than 45, I want the result to display fail. And there you go. I'll drag it down, and as you can see, instead of fail for Ron, it now displays a third grade that says just pass because he scored 45. Moving on to the AND function. AND is a logical function that returns true only if all of the logical conditions specified within that function are true. Let's say I want AND to return true if marks of both math and history are above 45. So this is how my AND function will look like. Equal to AND. First condition is that cell B2 should be greater than 45. Second is that cell C2 should be greater than 45. Now only if both these conditions are true, AND function will return true. Double click here. Notice how the AND function has returned true only for Hermione because she has scored more than 45 in both math and history. Harry has scored less than 45 in history. Ron has also scored less than 45 in math. And Draco has scored less than 45 in both, which is why the AND function has returned false in all of these cases. Let's use AND with if, so that instead of true and false, we can display some custom text like this. Start if. I'll use the same conditions within AND like I've used before, scoring more than 45 in both subjects. And if this AND condition returns true, I'm going to display pass. Otherwise, the result will be fail. And there you go. Looks like only Hermione has passed because AND returned true only for her. OR is another logical function, but it returns true even if any one of the conditions specified within the function are true. Let's look at this data set. We have the total scores of these 4 students along with their participation in sports. Let's say the school's criteria for nominating a leader is that either their total marks need to be greater than 90 or they should be a part of the sports team. If any one of these conditions is true, then they can be a nominee for head boy or head girl. For this scenario, I am going to use OR. Equal sign OR followed by the first condition that marks need to be greater than 90. And the second condition being that the sports column should say yes. And there you go. The OR function returns true for everybody except for Ron because neither are his marks greater than 90 nor is he a part of the sports team. But the rest of them have at least one true scenario. Draco has marks less than 90 but he is a part of the sports team. Hermione is not a part of the sports team but has marks greater than 90, and Harry meets both criteria, so it's true for the rest of them. Let's use OR with if. If, and then we write the OR condition for both these cases. And if OR returns true, if should display nominee as a result, or else it should display no. And there you go. Everybody is qualified to be a nominee except for Ron. The SUMIF function is very similar to the SUM function that we have discussed already. If you want to refresh your memory, you can go back to this minute and quickly check out how the SUM function works, but be back immediately after. Do not go to Reels or Shorts or TikTok. Now the only difference between SUM and SUMIF is that SUMIF will calculate only the sum of values that meet the criteria that we specify. Let's have a look. We have a set of 5 values here. Let's say I want to find the sum of only those values that are greater than 100. This is what my SUMIF will look like. Equal sign SUMIF, I'll specify the range, which are these 5 cells, and then I'll specify the criteria, which is greater than 100. And there you go. It has added these 2 values, 150 and 200, which are the only 2 values that are greater than 100, and given as a result, 350. If you would have noticed, the syntax of SUMIF has another argument. This is useful if the cell range where you are applying the criteria is different from the range you want to apply the SUM function on. Let me explain. In this data set, let's assume I only want to calculate the marks scored by Harry. So my first argument would be this range where I want to apply the condition on. Second parameter is a condition, which in our case is the name Harry, because I only want to calculate Harry's scores. The third argument is the range I want to use to perform the SUM function on, which in this case is the marks column. And there you have it. The SUMIF function gives us a sum of all of Harry's marks. And finally, we have COUNTIF, which is a statistical function. We have already discussed how count, counta, and count blank work at this minute. You can go back to this minute to jog your memory if you want to. COUNTIF, just like the rest of them, gives us a count, but it returns the count only of the cells that meet a specific criteria. Let's say I want to find out the number of times Hermione has appeared in these cells. For that, I'm going to use the COUNTIF function. Specify the range, which is this column, followed by the criteria, which is the name Hermione, and it has returned 2, which is the correct answer. Let's say I change this name to Hermione, and there you go, the count becomes 3. Let's look at another example. I want to find out the number of marks in this range that are greater than 30. And there you go, the count is 4. When compared to the rest of the functions, logical functions are pretty chill and easy to understand. But I will still recommend you practice using the workbook provided in the description. So in this section, we have learned how to use if function, nested ifs, and with if, or with if, sum if, and countif functions. If you're liking this video so far, don't forget to hit that like button and do not forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon, because we make career and finance videos that are crisp, to the point, and extremely useful. So far, we've only been playing around with numbers, but your data set might also have text, and with text comes misspelled words, an extra space here and there, or you might just want to arrange your string a certain way. Let's quickly look at a few text functions that will help you do that. The first set are the left, right, and mid functions. Let's assume we want to extract the first 6 characters from this string. For that, we will use the left function like this. First argument is the string address, followed by the number of characters you want to extract from that string, which in our case is 6. And there you go, the first 6 characters from the string are returned. The right function works the same way. First argument is the text address. The second parameter is the number of characters you want from right to left. I want 11. So if you count backwards from right to left, you will see that 11 stops at this letter T, and that's what gets returned by this function. The mid function is a little different. It can return characters from anywhere in the middle. Its parameters are text address, the position from which you want to start fetching the characters. I want to fetch 2C, which starts at position 8. And I want 6 characters after it. And there you go, 2C gets returned. The next set of 3 functions are simple. The upper function needs just one parameter, which is the text address, and it converts the entire string into uppercase. Similarly, lower function converts the entire string into lowercase and proper capitalizes the first character of each word from the text, just like this. 2 text functions that you might use often are length and text. The length function accepts a text address as its argument and returns the length of that text. As you can see, it has returned 19, which is the length of this string. Keep calm and accept. Now let's add a few unnecessary spaces in this string. 2 spaces in the beginning, 1 extra space between each word, and 2 spaces in the end, which is 7 extra spaces. Now let's use the length function on this morph string, and it returns 26, which is including the 7 extra spaces we've just added. Let's apply the trim function on this morph string. Trim is supposed to remove all extra spaces from a string. As you can see, it returns the original string after removing all those extra spaces. Just to be sure, let's use the length function on this result. And it returns 19, which was the original length. The last set of functions in this section are concat and text join. Let's say you want to combine these 4 words into one sentence. Let's use the concat function to do that by entering these 4 cell addresses as parameters. Obviously, there's a problem here because concat just stitches cell values together without any delimiter that separates one cell value from another. We can, however, add a space manually like this. Concat followed by the first word, comma, then a space which must be specified in quotes, then the second word, comma, space, and then the third word, comma, space, and finally the fourth word, cell address. This gives us the string we want with spaces added in between, but obviously this can get a little cumbersome because you have to manually add a space between every word you want to combine. Or you can use text join. The syntax includes a delimiter, which in our case is the space we want between our words. Second parameter is true or false, depending on whether you want empty spaces ignored or not. And the third argument is the cell range. And there you go, neatly combined words separated with a space. So in this section, we've learned how to use text functions like right, left, and mid, upper, lower, proper, length and trim function, concat and text join functions. If you want me to cover any other text functions in the future videos, then comment below and let me know. Do not take this section lightly because some professionals call VLOOKUP their bread and butter. But why? Let's find out. This data set has 25 book names, their authors, and prices on Amazon. Let's say from this main data set, you want to extract the prices of these 7 books. Instead of doing it manually where you search for each of these books one by one, you can use the VLOOKUP function. A VLOOKUP function helps you find items from a data set by row. Let's look at its syntax. VLOOKUP. The first argument is the value you're using to perform your search, which in our case is the name of the book. Second argument is the table array or data set you're searching in. So I'm going to select this entire data set. The third argument is the value you want this function to return. I want the prices of these books, which are in column 3 of the original data set. So I'll enter 3 here. Next, you need to enter whether you want an exact match or an approximate match. I'm looking for an exact match, so I'll enter false here. And there you go. That is the price of this book. I'll double click here, and as you can see, VLOOKUP has retrieved the values for all of these books in no time at all. Now let's look at a common error you might encounter while using the VLOOKUP function. For that, I'll enter the name of the first book, The Fault in Our Stars, here, and then copy the VLOOKUP formula down. And that's the error we're looking for. #n/a error occurs when a lookup function cannot find the referenced value. But Fault in Our Stars is right here in the first row. Why couldn't the formula find it? Because of relative referencing. If you notice the formula bar here, as we kept copying the formula down, all the addresses also kept on incrementing. In the first formula, we gave the correct table address. But when you copied the formula down, the table address also got incremented. Which means for this lookup function, the table address starts from the second row. Similarly, the third formula leaves out another row. Fourth formula leaves out another. And by the time we reach here, the table starts from the 8th row, which means VLOOKUP is not even checking the first 7 rows right here. To solve this, we need to log the table address, just like we learned in absolute referencing. Go to the first formula, type a $ before the row number and column alphabet of the table address. You can even select the cell address and press F4. This locks the table address in place. Now let's copy this formula to the rest of the cells. And there you go. The error is now eliminated. How? Notice the formula bar. The first argument's row number gets incremented, just like we wanted to. But we have used absolute referencing to log the table address, which is why it remains the same, no matter where the formula is copied to. Confusing? Don't worry, we have covered relative and absolute referencing in detail at this minute. I would highly encourage you to go back and revisit this section to refresh your memory. And that is how VLOOKUP works. But there is one limitation of VLOOKUP that you must know about. VLOOKUP works only if the lookup value column, which is the value you're using to do your search, is the leftmost column in the table. Let me show you why. Here, the book title is the rightmost column and price is the leftmost column. Let's write our VLOOKUP function now so that it returns the first column, which is price. And there you go. It throws you an error. Even though we've entered everything right in the formula. Table is right, the lookup value is right. Even the column index number to return as result is correct, which is 1 for price. And yet, you will receive an error because the function VLOOKUP searches from left to right. It won't go back and look from right to left. So the value you're using to make the search should always be to the left of the value you want returned. We never thought of this as a major problem really, because at work we would simply take the lookup column and make it the leftmost column of the table before using the VLOOKUP function. Just like this. I'm going to cut this column and insert it as the leftmost column and modify the VLOOKUP function right here a little bit, modify the cell addresses of the table array. I want price return, which is now column number 2, and there you go. Works like a charm. We also have some other lookup functions like HLOOKUP, which does a horizontal lookup instead of a vertical lookup. But because most data sets are arranged vertically, VLOOKUP is the one that is used the most. We also have XLOOKUP, which can work in any direction, vertically or horizontally. But a function combination that is pretty popular for performing lookup is the index match function. If you want me to make a separate video explaining index match or any other lookup functions, then comment below and let me know. So in this section we have covered what is VLOOKUP, errors you might encounter while using the VLOOKUP function and how to resolve them, and a limitation of the VLOOKUP function. Please use the practice Excel sheet to practice the VLOOKUP function, because if I have introduced VLOOKUP as someone's bread and butter, then it should not be taken lightly. I hope you had fun learning VLOOKUP, because I sure had fun making this section. What are tables and why do you need them? To answer that question, let's first look at this data set of book titles, author names and prices. To convert this into a table, select any cell. Go to the Insert tab and click on Table. Excel automatically detects what is the cell range for your data, which in our case is all of this data until row number 27. Since I'm happy with the selection, I'll click on OK. And now we have an MS Excel table. As soon as you create a table, a new tab, Table, appears in the ribbon with all of these cool features. And that is why people like to convert their data set into tables, because tables provide you with features to help you better organize, analyze and visualize your data. Let's see how. The first box you'll notice is table name. It's a good practice to name your tables, and even better to start your table name with TBL or TB, followed by what the table stands for. In our case, let's name this TBL books. I'll show you how naming your tables is going to be useful in just a few minutes. Now let's quickly look at these features. This checkbox makes the header row of your table appear or disappear. The total checkbox makes a new row appear at the bottom that displays the sum of the price column. If you hover here at the bottom right corner of this cell, you will notice an arrow which will provide you with a list of other mathematical functions that you can perform on this column. Say max, count or even average. In fact, you can perform these operations for the rest of the columns as well. Going back to these checkboxes, banded rows and banded columns highlight alternate rows or alternate columns. This, as you can see, can improve the readability of your table. First column checkbox highlights the first column and last column checkbox highlights the last column. Finally, the filter checkbox applies filters to the headers of your table. We have discussed what filters are already when we were discussing the Home tab feature. If you want to jog your memory, you can always go back here to this minute and learn in detail what filters are all about. After you create a table, let's say you want to add a new row to it. Just start typing and press enter, and that new row will automatically become a part of that table with all of its features applied. Same goes with adding new columns. Let's look at the rest of the options here. We will learn about pivot tables in a few minutes. You can use the remove duplicates option to delete any duplicate values from your table. I want you to pay attention to this box. If I select all of these columns and click on OK, then only those rows which are absolute duplicates, which means rows that have same values for all the columns, will be deleted. Let me explain. Let's say my table has two rows for Wings of Fire with the same author name, same price. Now if I select all columns in the remove duplicates option and click on OK, then it will remove one row. But if I have two Wings of Fire with same author name but different prices, and I select all columns in this remove duplicate box, then no row gets deleted. Because by checking all these boxes, I told Excel that a row is duplicate only if all of its column values are an exact match with some other row. Now our table has two Wings of Fire with different prices. If I click on remove duplicates, but this time only select book name column, then Excel would delete the second Wings of Fire even if it has a different price or different author. Because we told Excel that any row is a duplicate as long as it has the same book name, and that's it. So selecting which columns you would want to match is extremely important when you're using the remove duplicates feature. In your practice workbook, use this table to play around with the remove duplicates feature. Check and uncheck different columns and see how it works. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below and let me know. Moving on to the next feature. Think of convert to range as an undo button that converts your table back to a normal data set, a normal range. We don't want that, so I'll select no. Slicer is like a filter but with a better UI. Let's say I want an author name filter. So I click on insert slicer, select author name, and a window appears. Over here I can select say Dan Brown, and only books by Dan Brown will appear. Let's say I want Mr. APJ Abdul Kalam's books to appear as well. So I'll click on this icon that says multi-select and then select Mr. APJ Abdul Kalam. And books of both of these authors will be displayed. Clicking here will clear the filter. You can create as many slices as you want depending on the columns present in your table. Once you create a slicer on your ribbon, a new slicer tab gets created which allows you to customize it even further. I would encourage you to check out these options and see how they change your slicer. And this last option allows you to choose a table style that you like most. Just like this. Now let's get back to the table name. Because we gave a custom name to our table, TBL Books, it would make it easier for us to refer to this table name from other cells in the spreadsheet. Let me show you how. Let's say I want to find the cost of the most expensive book from this table. For that, I will use the max function. Open parenthesis, and here I'll start typing the table name, TBL. And there you go. Our table gets recommended right here. And that is why it's a best practice to start table names with TBL, so that just by typing TBL, all the tables you have named will come under recommendations all at one place. After the table name, I'll use a square bracket and Excel starts recommending the column names as well that are present within that table. I want the maximum of the price column. Close square bracket, close parenthesis, and there you go. That is the maximum value. Excel lets me extract any info from this table, even if it's in a sheet other than where the table is stored. Just like this. The max function works even here in a new sheet. And it's dynamic. Let's say I update the maximum value here from 454 to say 900. Then it gets updated in the result of this function too. Isn't it cool? So always name your tables, not just for better identification, but to make it easier for you to recognize them anywhere in a workbook. Moving on to the next topic of this section, charts. They provide a visual representation of your data. Let's look at this data set of monthly expenses. Let's say you want to use charts to visually see where you're spending most of your money. So to create one, select your data, click on the Insert tab, and you can choose one of the charts present here, like column, bar chart, line chart, pie chart. Or you can click on recommended charts to see a preview of how some charts might look like. I'm going to select this 2D column chart. I'm going to put this chart right here for better visibility, which means you can change the position of the chart on your sheet. When you click on the chart, you would notice these colorful lines around your data. You can bring your cursor to the bottom right corner of the selection and move it around. This way you can unselect a row or a column and that will directly be reflected in your chart. As you can see, March is no longer part of the chart and now it only has January's data. I'm going to select this entire data set again. When you insert a chart, a new chart design tab appears in your ribbon. Let's look at how we can customize these chart elements. Axis helps you add or remove the X and Y axis labels. I like both of them, so I am going to keep it that way. This lets you add a title to your axis. You can call this one, say, expenditure, but I don't think that's necessary. With chart title, you can give a title to your chart. Let's call this one my 2023 expenses. I don't need it for now, so I'll remove it. Data labels and data tables add extra data to your chart. But in this scenario, it's making our chart look too cluttered. But if your chart is somewhere else and your data set is somewhere else, then you can use this option to display the data table within the chart. With grid lines, you can decide the scale that gets displayed, which is represented by these light gray lines in the background. And legend explains the colors used in the chart. I'm going to display it on the right. The options in gray are the ones that might be available for some other types of charts. So do play around with these options by selecting a different chart. But if you find all of this customization cumbersome, then just click on this icon, Quick Layout, and choose from the layout you like best. These layouts are nothing but a combination of the chart elements that Excel recommends. From here, you can change the color of your chart. Over here, you can change its style. This switch row/column option is pretty useful. Let's see why. Currently on the x-axis of our chart, we have the expense items, which are our rows, and these bars represent months, which are our columns. By clicking here, they get interchanged. Now the axis has months and the bars represent the expense items. So you can choose how you want your data displayed. Select data provides you more control over these options we've just discussed. You can even change the order of data. Say if you want to display March 1st, Feb next, etc. Change chart type is where you can change your mind about the chart you've chosen and go with something else. And move chart allows you to move your chart to either a new sheet or a small object in any of the pre-existing sheets that you can select from this drop down. You can even use this format tab to customize your chart even further. Give it a fill if you want, change font styles. But for the most part, chart design tab should be enough to get you to the chart you want. Before we end this section, let's quickly discuss what kind of chart might work best for you. Line charts work great if you want to show trends, like how profits are increasing or decreasing every year. Whenever you search for Sensex or Nifty on Google, what gets displayed is a line chart. Pie charts are great if you want to view various categories in relation to each other. For example, pie charts would have worked great if we had just 1 month expenses. Then we could see and compare where most of our money is going in which expense. Bar charts and column charts help you visualize how similar data sets compare against each other, like literacy rates of each state or population of countries, or in our case, expenses of various months. The only difference is that in bar charts, the bars appear horizontally, and for column charts, they appear vertically. So really, you get to decide which chart is best for you based on what question you want to answer, because that will answer how you would like to visualize your data. Please use the practice workbook you've downloaded to play around with this data set and practice the various features of an MS Excel table as well as charts. And don't forget to comment and tell me which chart type you like best. So in this section, we have covered how to convert a data set into a table, various table features including naming them, customizing them, removing duplicates, slicers, and how to access a table anywhere in the workbook. And charts, their different types, how to add chart elements, changing their style, switching row column, and moving charts around. Oh my god, we have completed 10 sections, 10! It is no mean feat, so give yourself a pat on the back. You did good, kid. Before we understand what pivot tables are, let's first understand why we need pivot tables. Since quite some time now, people have referred to data as the new oil. Data helps us make important decisions. For example, if you have a large data set of social marketing spend, then your data helps you decide which platform made you the most money and where to invest more. If it's student data, then maybe it can tell you which departments lack quality teaching and research facilities based on, say, the scores of students over the years. Now, one of the MS Excel features that helps us answer these questions is the pivot table. Just as their name suggests, they can pivot or completely change the view, the structure of your data, so that you can look at it from different angles and solve questions that have you puzzled. They help you analyze data, perform calculations, make comparisons, observe trends, patterns, and all of this without modifying the original data itself. You'll understand it better when you look at a pivot table. Creating a pivot table is a 3-step process. Step number 1 is to make sure that your data meets the following 6 criteria. Number 1, correct your column headings. If your column headings say column 1, column 2, then change them to represent what data they hold, because these column headings will become field names in your pivot table later. Number 2, make sure there's only one header row. 3, remove blank rows, columns, or cells. 4, format value fields as numbers instead of text. 5, format date fields as dates instead of text. And number 6, remove any duplicate values. In a way, step number 1 is about cleaning your data a little bit. Step number 2 is to create a table. Look at this data set of startup funding information. I have modified this data a little bit to make understanding pivot tables easier. This is not real data. So let's create a table. We have discussed how to create a table already at this minute, just in case you want to revisit it. Quickly select any cell, go to the Insert tab, Table. Your data range is detected automatically by Excel. Click OK and your table gets created. I'm going to name this one TBL Funding. Now the third and final step is to insert a pivot table. To do that, select any cell in your newly created table, go to Insert and click on Pivot Table. you need to select a table or a range, which in our case is our table TBL funding. And here you can decide if you want to create the pivot table in a new sheet or in the existing sheet. Let's select a new worksheet. A new sheet opens up with a pane that says pivot table fields to its right. And this is where the magic happens. This pane has 5 windows. In the first window, you will see column names from your original table, which are now field names. And this is why it's important to name your columns before you create a pivot table. The rest of these 4 windows will decide what your pivot table will look like. Fields you want as columns in your pivot table can be dragged and dropped in this box. Over here, drop the fields you want as rows in your pivot table. If you want to have any fields as filters on top of the entire pivot table, you can place them here. And in the values box, drop fields that you want to perform calculations like sum, count, max, min, etc. Let's play around with these fields a little bit. Let's drop this field startup name in the column box. As you can see, each startup name now appears as a new column in our pivot table. But this doesn't look right. Let's drop startup names in the row box. Now the startup names are displayed as rows and it looks so much better. Looks like we're going somewhere with this. Let's drop something in values. Let's say investor name. Value box applies mathematical functions on the fields that you drop in it. On this field, it has used the function count. It has counted the number of times each of these startups have had an investment, like Byju's X has had 1 investment round so far. Mamaearth X has had 3. We can go back to our original data set and double check. And indeed, there are 3 rows for Mamaearth X. Going back to our pivot table, you can change the count function to something else. Just right click, field settings and select the function you want. Let's say I want a quick sum of the total investments each of these startups have received. For that, I will drop the amount field in this box. The value box automatically chooses the function as sum. And there you go. Now we have a list of startups, the count of the number of times they have been invested in and the sum of total investments they have received. Now it can get a little tricky to decide which field to drop in which box, and one of the ways to simplify it is to start with the question you are trying to answer. That question helps you decide how you will build your pivot table. Like this pivot table answers the question, what is the total amount of investment received by each of these startups? Let's look at our original data set again. It has all these industry verticals like e-commerce, fintech, video games. Now, say the question I want to answer is this: how much money has been invested in each industry vertical? This question now completely changes my pivot table. For that, I will go back to my pivot table sheet. Since I'm only interested in sum, I'll remove investor name from the values box. Next, let's take industry vertical and drop it in rows right below startup name. Okay, but the table is still not answering my question. Pay attention to this rows box. Let's see what happens if I pull the industry vertical above startup name. Great. As you can see, now the grouping is happening first based on industry vertical and then startups. This looks much better because now not only can I see total investments per industry vertical right here in bold, but I can even expand these and see what startups within those verticals have received an investment. As we just witnessed, if there are multiple fields in a box, then the grouping happens in the order in which the fields have been listed. My question can be answered if I remove the startup name from here as well. And I can see a simple table of sum of investments per industry vertical. I can even change this function here from sum to count and see how many times each industry vertical has been considered for investment. The filter area here is really an optional filter that you can use to further drill down your data. In our case, I can have the startup name in the row window and drag this industry vertical in the filters window. This creates an overall filter on the pivot table. From here, I can select an industry vertical and view all the startups and the total investment amount, just like this. You can even insert a slicer here. I have discussed what slicers are at this minute already. So please feel free to go back and revisit what slicers actually do. And that's it. Like I said, it's important to know the question that you want an answer to, which helps you decide how you'd like to construct your pivot table. But there's another feature of MS Excel that can make your pivot table learning experience easier. For that, go to your original data, select the Home tab on your ribbon and click on this button right here that says Analyze Data. Excel will analyze your data and return interesting tables and graphs related to those insights in this pane right here. When you click on this text box right here, you will see a list of suggestions based on your data. Or you can even enter a specific question. But if you don't have any questions in mind, then just scroll down and you will see that Analyze Data has already provided high-level visual summaries, trends and patterns. Like this insight right here shows the amount of investments done per city, which is quite cool because I never thought of finding city-wise investments before I clicked on this Analyze button. So, checking what pivot tables or what questions this Analyze Data option is suggesting you is a good place to start if you are a beginner. Obviously, I'm just scratching the surface when it comes to what pivot tables can do. If you want me to make a detailed video about pivot tables, about how you can combine data from multiple sheets into your pivot table, then comment below and let me know. And I'll be personally offended if you do not use the practice workbook to see how pivot tables work. So do check out the description for the link and start practicing. So far in this section we have covered what are pivot tables and why do you need them, 6 criteria you need to meet before you create one, how to answer specific questions using pivot tables, and of course how to use the Analyze Data option on the Home tab. We cannot end this video without talking about some common errors you'll encounter while working with Excel. To err is human, but to err is also to excel, because you cannot excel unless you make some errors. I'm so proud of this pun. Alright, I really have to use the washroom, so let's get this over with. First is the most easy to solve error, the hash hash hash. If you see this error, it simply means that your cell values do not have enough space to breathe, aka your column is too narrow to display the entire value. Just like this. To resolve it, just double click on the right border of the column, which increases its width. Or use the Auto Fit Column Width option that's in your Home tab. Under Home tab, Auto Fit Column Width. We have already discussed what Auto Fit Column Width does in detail at this minute in case you want to rewind and check it out. And there you go, the hash 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 error has disappeared and the values it was hiding have been neatly displayed. Whenever you try to divide a value by 0, you will see this error. Suppose you have 2 columns, x and y, and you wrote a formula to divide x by y. If by any chance any of the y values are 0, then your formula will throw this error. One of the ways to solve it is to use an if. If your divisor is 0, then display not possible, and if not, just go ahead and perform the division. I have already discussed what if function does in detail at this minute. So in case you want to jog your memory, go back to this minute to watch the magic that is the if function. Just formatting the results a little bit, and there you go. This error has disappeared and the results have been neatly displayed. This error occurs if you're trying to use a lookup function and it doesn't find the value you're searching for in the table range you have provided. Let's go back to our lookup table tab. Over here, let me write a new book's name, Kafka by the Shore. And there you go. The hash n/a error because the book doesn't even exist in the table for us to fetch the price. If you kind of forgot what VLOOKUP is and how it works, don't worry, just go back to this minute and watch the VLOOKUP section again. Now, how to avoid this error? Towards the end, I'll show you how you can use the if error function to display a neat text just in case a value is never found. That way, this nasty error message will not blow up on your face, especially when you're expecting it. Hash name is an error that appears just in case you have misspelled a formula name. Here, I've added an extra u to the sum function name, and Excel threw this error right back at me. The same error if I add, say, an extra O to VLOOKUP, or if I just mess up the syntax in some way. Just correct your function name to make this error go away. Hash value is a generic error that occurs if I use the wrong data type in a formula, or there's something wrong with the way the formula is typed. Here is an instance where I'm trying to apply the plus operator on 2 text strings, which gives me the hash value error. but it works fine if my cells have numbers. Hash null is an error you get in case there's an accidental space in your formulas. Let me give you an example. Suppose you want to find the sum of these values, but while providing the arguments to the sum function, instead of a colon or a plus sign or a comma, you've entered a space. That's when you see this error. And that's because space in itself is an operator in Excel. It's called the range intersect operator. And clearly you will get an error if you place what Excel thinks is an operator at the wrong place. To solve this error, just remove the extra spaces that are masquerading as operators. You will get the hash num error when you're trying to perform an impossible calculation, like trying to perform the square root of -9, or trying to get 2 to the power of 1 and a lot of zeros. That's when you get a hash num error. Just correct your numbers and you'll be good to go. And those are some of the most common errors you might encounter while working with Excel. However, you can choose to not have an unpleasant error message glaring at you by using the if error function. Let's say I want to divide x by y, but I know that y can be 0 at times. So I'll use an if error like this, equal if error followed by the calculation I want to perform, and then the custom text to display in case it throws an error. Now the if error function returns a custom text instead of a hash diy/0 error message. And that's all we have for today. Just to remind you, the next video of this course is top 10 Excel interview questions and answers. So do not forget to check that out. And congratulations, you are no longer just a beginner. But to become a pro, make sure you download the practice Excel sheet using the link in the description and play around with the features we've discussed today and more, because the only thing that turns a beginner into a pro is practice. Do check out the other videos related to career and finance on this channel. All of them are crisp, to the point, and aimed to make you learn. And if you are preparing for an interview, then you must check out our interview preparation course, which covers how to answer some of the most commonly asked behavioral questions like tell me about yourself, explain the gap in your employment, what are your biggest achievements, so on and so forth. And this interview preparation course is on YouTube. I've left its link in the description. I'm Taskeen. This is The Urban Fight, and I'll see you in the next video.